Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Suzanne Harris, and I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today. Our podcast talks to the authors about themselves, their latest books, and we also talk about their ideas. We also try to find out the story behind each one of those books. I wish you'd been with us before I started recording. I have been having such a wonderful time with my guest today. He is charming, delightful, and I can't wait to introduce you to him. His name is Peter Massam, and he's here to talk about the second book in his trilogy, Learning Experience Trilogy. And the title of the book is Moose Conquering Fear. Now, I know, Peter, that we got their attention right away with the title of that book. It is such a pleasure to have you. I am enjoying you so much. I know that our listeners can't wait to meet you. Thanks for being my guest today.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm looking forward to it, as ever.
You know, I'm always curious, and you and I don't think have talked about this. Writers become writers for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's as simple as they're a reader as a child, somebody's style captivates them, and they begin to write. Sometimes there's a person that they either admire, or there's a family member who is a writer, or there's a teacher, or there's someone who recognizes a spark in a child and encourages them to write. Sometimes there is some cataclysmic event that happens in a person's life, and that may be a positive event or it may be a negative event, but there's a compulsion that happens as a result of the event, excuse me, and they feel like they need to share that event with the world. I'm curious about how you started to write and how old were you? Any of those reasons, or are there other reasons?
I think we've probably touched on the inspiration, if you like, which goes back way back to my school days and having a marvellous English teacher who was very quietly spoken and respectful of the sixth formers in front of him. This is 17, 18-year-olds who are young adults effectively and want to be treated as such. And he was very complimentary about our skills, if you like, in English literature, and it always that sort of stays with you. It's in the back of your mind that because if you have a love of reading and literature later on in life, at whatever time it is, there is a thought that if occasion demands it, then you can put pen to paper and do things with that. So in my business career, for example, people would seek advice about how to word a certain email or a summary, knowing that you can be concise and influence people. That's what it comes down to, I think, in business, is using words and your voice to influence people to make the right decisions, or the decisions that are in your favour or your company's favour. But then you're quite right. There is a cataclysmic aspect to these things as well, which is that once you look back on your experiences, and my business world was very much focused on customer experience, so that remained with me as a soapbox topic for many years. And when you come towards the end of that career, you tend to look back at the experiences you've had. And for me, for the last 2 years that I worked, I couldn't wait to stop working because I wanted to get this out of my head and onto the page. And I did it in a matter of, I think it was 18 or 22 months maximum.
Wow, for 3 books?
Yes. So, yes, they're not very long, but that's by design, so that people don't feel that they're trying to wade into some huge tome. So it's easier to digest. But, yes, and I really couldn't stop, and I'd just moved house as well. So having got that 2 months. I think 2 months after moving in, I was at a stage where I thought, "Oh, I'm not settled, but I'm in a place where I can write now, and I just wanted to do it and get it out." So yes, it all came out very quickly, and although I have been, I had cause to write other books before. I think the first one was in 2003, and probably had been writing the occasional poem before that, just on the odd occasion when the emotion moved me, I suppose.
Which came first, writing fiction, or did poetry call you first?
No, I think poetry came first. Yes, definitely.
That explains, I think one of the things that explains is the way that you write. I think I admire poets very much, first of all, just because of the way you view the world and because of the way that you can use the language. And I think that shows your command and your use of the language shows in the book. The poetry comes through. You didn't write the book in poetry, but I'm a former English teacher too. So as I read what you wrote, I could hear you can just hear the poetry. I mean, that may not make sense, but it makes sense in my head because you can hear the command of the language and using the right word and using the right turn of phrase. So it's really interesting. I was real curious about that because I know you've written some volumes of poetry, and I was very curious about which came first. It's interesting that it was the poetry.
Yes, and you're right. Choice of words is always... it's good to have that command, but also, I suppose, the sounds of words too. Mm-hmm. So the choice isn't just about the content or the context, but it's also the sound of the word and the letters that are in that word make that word either softer or harder.
And the structure. It's structure too as well. Yeah.
So that can have a bad effect on your listener or the person you're trying to convince of something, or it can persuade them that actually, there is a better way, and they will listen to what you have to say.
Well, let's talk about the trilogy and how Moose fits in, because the first book is titled Nipper. The second book is the one that we're really talking about right now, Moose Conquering Fear, and then there's a third book called Know Your Mind. So Nipper is really sort of an introductory book so that we meet our character, George, for the first time, right?
Yes.
Any autobiographical things here? I mean, George is a fictional character, but is Peter in there?
Well, Peter has to be in there.
Exactly.
Because it's all about experience. So you have to put those experiences in a detached way, if you like, so that you're not embroiled still in the emotions that are expressed in the books, but you can take that slightly more detached view by putting it into a different character. And you may have noticed that in the last book I actually changed to a first-person narrator because, being slightly more academic and philosophical in nature, I felt it was easier to identify with George's mind and the thoughts that were going through his mind if he spoke in the first person. So that was the concept behind it.
What audience age group did you have in mind? Is there a different age group for each book?
Not really, because it's all about life's experience, and this can be looking back in retrospect as an older person, or looking forward as a younger person. It is also, in Moose Conquering Fear, it's looking at life's challenges that are thrown in your direction, and how you can help yourself come through those and come out the other side with a stronger understanding of what you're capable of in terms of how your mind deals with things, and how you faced up to different situations. And it's not always, a happy conclusion at each event, but certainly the majority moves towards the positive side.
I think you've done something quite unique with the trilogy and with the books in general. You have a young male as your central character. And I know one of the things that you did that on purpose, because often when you're reading a novel like this, the main character will be female. And we don't normally see what a young male goes through. I thought that was a very creative approach. Is that just how that came to you to do it that way? Because that seemed right?
I have nothing but the greatest respect for ladies that have written books, novelists, and the way in which they have, if you like, become respected from some terrible times in Victorian times where things were really, they were not appreciated. Anything like the span of knowledge and creativity and everything else that we've seen in the last, 10, 20 years, I suppose. And that includes in business breaking through glass ceilings, into the CEO positions and that sort of thing. I think all that is splendid. And you're right. The characters, when you see things on TV or in a film, they do they have tended to look at the female angle, and I particularly wanted to swap that over and back, if you like, to a young male because of the high incidence that we saw, not just during COVID, but also before that, of young male suicide, which I felt was a terrible loss, both to society, to their families, and to the institutions and their friends at school, because these things happened at that kind of age. And I wanted the motivation, one of the strongest motivations was to help young lads in that situation where they're, if they feel that there is no other resort, then, they should have something where they can see that somebody else has been through a lot and has come through it very satisfactorily. And it's, it's the whole thing is a learning curve, but at the same time, it's really so that not just the people that are going through it can see that there is a shared experience there, but also that the parents equally can see what maybe they don't. It's not to say they wouldn't notice, but they haven't recognised maybe that some of their progeny are struggling with things because they keep quiet about it, and boys do tend to keep quiet because of the expectation on them that they should, in the UK, keep a stiff upper lip,
do the right thing,
grin and bear it. Mm-hmm. Yes, and grin and bear it, and it doesn't always work because sometimes the mental pressures that burdens you with just pile up higher and higher, and you do feel as though there is no way out. And that certainly is true in one section of this book. That is one of the most difficult of all the circumstances, probably, and there are some decisions that have to be made, that they have to be in a sort of cool light of day, but they have to be made during the most turbulent periods sometimes. So you have to appreciate what the impact is going to be of any decisions you make, whether it's personal relationships or business careers and that sort of thing. And you do your best, and you make what you think is the right decision, and it usually turns out to be the right one in the end. So yes, how to face those challenges.
let's talk about George a little.
Hmm.
We meet him in Nipper. Now, how old is he when we first meet him in Nipper?
He would be probably around 8, somewhere between 8 and 10, I suppose.
So in Nipper, George goes through a lot in the book. He deals with a lot of different situations. So we take him through Nipper. Where do we find him when we start Moose Conquering Fear?
Yeah, he's the last thing. When I say 8 to 10, that's when the book starts. But by the time the book finishes, he's in an extended year after finishing school, so 18, 19. So it's just before going off to university, and that's where this book begins. But it sort of previews before that a couple of fears which were latent fears from the Nipper times, which were mentioned in Nipper actually, about the dentist and also about water, fear of water, which then could be countered because of when going to university, he could enjoy his life there much more because the fear of water had literally subsided and submerged below the surface. So, yes, that's the time that we're looking at here is all the way through. In fact, I think the largest chunk of the book in the middle section is all about those university days, and which include a year abroad as part of a linguist course, and then out the other end, after some work experience abroad as well, in falling into a first job and into a first relationship. And by the time we finish the book, we're sort of just on the edge of a second relationship, I suppose.
Is there a part of Moose Conquering Fear that you'd like to share with the listener?
There is, yes. It's slightly longer than the last one I read for you.
It's okay.
But that's probably that's because this extract really, I think every young couple go through it, which is that they find themselves in rented accommodation. It's not their own. They have to save for a deposit for a house if they want to. Well, most people want to buy a house in this country. And it's finding a way of making ends meet, especially when maybe a child is on the way or is already with you. And if you're living in one of the more expensive counties in England, in the UK. So the to read for you is comes after of all things, an insurance man's visit to the house, which was quite unexpected and was forgotten by George at the time. Opened a door for him for a second job as an insurance salesman to bolster his income, having shared his problem with that insurance man. And so he'd gone off and done some training, which they provided free of charge, of course. And this really recounts his first foray into that world. Daylight was still plentiful when George made his first foray into an estate, which he'd identified as a good place to start. As he made his way up the first short pathway to a bungalow, his heart was pounding and the butterflies kicked in. What if? Echoed inside his head. He tried to banish it, semi-successfully. A knock on the frosted glass brought a large male figure into focus, and the door was thrown open by a loud voice. Yes? What is it? What do you want? I've come to ask you if you have any life insurance currently, or are looking to... His words were cut short by the curt reply. No, and we don't need any," after which the door was closed firmly in his face. "Guess that's a no," mumbled George to himself. "Now I know what to expect. The next time will not be so bad, hopefully," said his slightly deflated but recovering ego. A similar bungalow with a red door seemed inviting. Looks can be deceptive. Another no, followed by a green and a blue door. He began to calculate theories in his mind. It seems as if door colour is not a strong indicator of willingness to spend on life insurance. The evening wore on. He continued in vain to be invited in, before coming to a pleasant-looking extension with a bay window at the front. A car was parked in the drive, so he mustered his most confident but warm knock on its polished wooden door. The kindly-looking face of a gentleman in his late 50s greeted him, and he remarked how he and his wife had only been discussing the same the weekend before. "What a piece of luck," George contemplated, as another, more plausible theory entered his head. "At least I've got past the door." When asked to, he sat himself down on their ample mock leather sofa next to the gent with his wife opposite, who made them all tea. The conversation continued in a forthright manner, holding nothing back and adding his own experience of the company over 20 years or more. "I see. Poacher turned gamekeeper, eh? Or maybe it's the other way round. Anyway, you know what I mean." George did. He made to get up from the sofa, but sat back down again, as he'd forgotten his last sentence he'd rehearsed, thinking that realistically it would have no effect. He thought twice about it. "So, would you like to take out any insurance with us?" The words seemed at once strange but helpful, and he hoped not too gauche. Had he become part of that family too now? He dared not look up, waiting for the inevitable. "Yes, I very much think we should like to do that. What details do you need?" George could not believe his ears, and reconfirmed in what must have come across as utter astonishment. "So you'd like to take out insurance today? Tonight?" He faltered on the time as it had passed by so quickly, gazing out the bay window and seeing the evening already. As he gave a cheery wave goodbye from their front path, with the signed documents under his arm, he turned back to his car. Best to end on a good note, and it is getting late now, he thought out aloud, and with a spring in his tired step, glancing at his watch. Nearly 9. Time to head back.
I love it. I will applaud your reading and applaud your writing. That's exactly what I was talking about. You have a cadence, you have a way of turning a phrase, and you have a way of using words. You just pulled all of us right into George's misery and his victory. I love it, Peter. I love it. You're just an excellent, excellent writer.
Thank you. Yes, you're very kind.
Now, let's tell our listeners, I know from after they've heard the excerpt and all of the information that we've given them previously, they're interested in where they can find a copy of the book. It's on Amazon. You can find actually all 3 of the books in the trilogy on Amazon. If you'll just put in the name of the book, which in this case is Moose Conquering Fear. Moose, Moose. Yes, that's what I said. Conquering Fear by Peter, Peter, Massam, Massam. Put that in the search feature on Amazon and just click on it, and the book will come up. Now you'll see 2 things. There will be a short description of the book on the right, and then if you look at the book cover, the representation of the book cover, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 2 words. Look inside. If you'll click on those 2 words, the book will electronically open and you will be able to read an excerpt for yourself. You can also find the other two books. The first one is titled Nipper, Nipper, also by Peter Massam. And the third one is Know Your Mind, also by Peter Massam. Now, Peter, if they don't want to go to Amazon, because they can buy all three books right there, but some people would prefer not to buy from the biggest bookseller in the world. Are there some other places that they can find the books?
Yes, they should be able to go to any of their local bookstores, because the wholesalers who supply them are a globally worldwide organisation called Gardner, and they simply they would have to either go into that bookstore or request it from the bookstore, and they would be able to source it from Gardner. Alternatively, of course, they can go to the publisher of this particular trilogy, which is balboapress.com, and they're available there for local delivery in the US.
I also want us to talk about the fact that you are donating the proceeds of the sales of some of the books. Tell me about that donation process and what it's for.
Yes. As an author, as every author knows, some of their books are usually available to them at a reasonable, generous discount. And I've founded or co-founded a wildlife club just before I moved, which is a strange occurrence. It was only 4 months before I moved. But in my former village, with two other ladies, and I continue to support them by taking books to the events that they hold, and selling them at a discount as well to people who wish to buy them, and also the poetry books as well I take along, because they relate to the village in question, and donate all the proceeds to the wildlife club, so that more can be spent on enhancing their local neighbourhood.
Do they have a website?
Yes, they do. It's an acronym. It's C. Let me think.
I put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I was about to give you the tennis club's
Whoops.
That would never do. Oh, my goodness me. No, it's called the Burcott and Clifton Hamden Wildlife Club, which is a bit of a mouthful. But if you were to go onto Facebook, there is a group there which will take you to the website for them, because I wouldn't like to give you the wrong one. I know it will begin with BCH, because that's the Burcott and Clifton Hamden. But whether it goes on WC or not, I'm not sure. I don't think it does. So, yes, if people were to... and I'm quite a regular contributor to that Facebook group as well.
Now, you also have a Facebook page and a website. Let's give the Facebook address so that people can find you on Facebook as well.
Okay. Do you have that in front of you? Because
no,
I know
that's your job, not mine. your job, not mine, Peter.
Well, I know it's got a 33. It's peter.massam33 at facebook.com.
So the next tricky question, Peter, is can you give them your website?
Yes, that would have to be yes, that would have to be it, really, because otherwise I would point them towards LinkedIn for other things that I've done.
And I do want to mention, let's just...
I don't have a personal website, shall I say. No.
Okay. But, often if people will simply put the person's name in Google...
that's enough.
Yes,
enough.
you can find all kinds of information and places, etc. And possibly there's even a link back to the wildlife website, just because you're associated with it.
Yes, I think the person, because I was chairman of the tennis club for a long time, and he did some SEO. It's called the optimization, the search engine optimization on the web page. So I think when you do put my name in, Peter Massam, you will find that I come out at the top of that list. And then a few entries down, there aren't that many Peter Massams out there, I can tell you, from that.
I wouldn't think so.
No.
Very quickly,
one or two.
I do just want to mention your poetry, because I'm sure that some of our listeners, as they heard you read your prose, they became interested in your poetry because your prose is so beautiful. If your prose is this beautiful, then your poetry must be equally as beautiful. And I know that there are two poetry books that I'm aware of. The first one was the Cuz, C-U-Z, collection of poems, and then there's Second Cuz collection of poems. Tell me about that poetry and tell me what those involve.
The first one was really a harking back to those school days with the English teacher. One of the writers an artist that I respected a huge amount was William Blake, and not just because he was a good poet and actually a very good illustrator, but also he was very much before his time. So he wasn't sort of appreciated much in his lifetime, but his fame sort of came later after his death. And one of the works that's associated with him is the Songs of Experience and Innocence. I may have got that the wrong way round, which I've always been an admirer of. And I wanted to do a similar thing with the first in the Cuz collection. And to do that, I had to sort of enhance my non-existent artist skills. So in my lunchtimes, or one or two lunchtimes in a week in my last job, there was a course that was being put on for free about sketching. I thought, I'll go along then, because I'd like to learn. I always liked sketching things, so I'll go along and learn a new skill, and use that to put together what I've called sketch poems, which were centered on locations, both at work and, which was a very green space, and in the surrounding counties. There are 3 counties around here that are particularly beautiful. And I spent time doing the sketch, but I also took a photograph so that people could compare the two and also probably recognize more the location from the photograph than they would necessarily from my sketch, which is probably the poorer. But it was a concept of putting images together with poetry that I was keen to do, to pay tribute to William Blake and my former English teacher, who are, as well as the lady who taught me how to sketch. They're all mentioned in the preface of that first Cuz collection book.
I love the idea. I love the idea. Former English teacher. Yes, love the idea. Former English teacher. Uh-huh.
And then the second one, and I did ask permission from the school because he's passed away many years ago, if I could credit him in the, or mention his name in the preface, and they agreed to that. And then in the second Cuz collection book, called Reflections in a Country Garden, I wanted to capture, before I left my last house, which was bigger than the house I'm in now, because I was downsizing, and it had a lovely garden, which I maintained all the time, all the 11 years that I was there, and planted with various things and made some changes, as you do. But when I walked around the garden, as I like to do, because it was about a third of an acre,
Wow.
it occurred to me that every time I looked at a flower that came up, or whether it was snowdrops in the spring or love in a mist in this time of year, it made me think of the people that I associated with that, or the events, such as, I'd planted some agapanthus around a little leaved lime tree to remind me of my time that I was in Kenya, which is also reflected in this book, by the way.
Oh.
Just a snippet of it anyway. And I thought, I want something to remember this garden by, because I know that the people coming in will make changes as you would expect them to do. And it won't be the same after this. But I wanted to capture all of it in both images. So I took photographs at different times of the year. And then I sat down before and during COVID and wrote the poems to go with those images about how your choice of plants and your choice of flowers are inspired by past events or people that you've known, because many people, for example, get given pot plants, or used to be given pot plants, and they would put them in what they call their friend's garden. And that's what a lot of people will associate with. And there were lots of polyanthus and hyacinths, and all the favourites would normally go in that sort of space. But I wanted to capture a moment in time, which is the garden looking at its best before I left, so that it's not lost. So that was the second book of poetry.
Peter, you and I could talk and talk and talk. I enjoy you so much. You're such a Renaissance man. I love your views. I love how you see things. I love how you put your views in words. I love your prose. Your poetry is beautiful. This has just been a delight for me. Thank you so very much for being my guest today. It's been a pleasure.
And for me too, Suzanne. Always a pleasure. And yes, I hope your listeners are not put off by anything that they'd heard.
I don't see how they could be. I mean, listening to someone with that wonderful creative brain that you have talk about their work with, you hear the passion in your voice as you talk about your work. And I think that's one of the most important things about an auditory interview, is that a person listening to this interview will hear it differently than if they're watching an interview, because they will focus a lot more on the words and they'll hear a lot more of the passion from the author. And I think you just did that wonderfully. So this is just terrific. And I want our listeners to remember that you can find all of Peter's work on Amazon, and the one we really were talking about today is the second in his Learning Experience trilogy. The title of the book, again, is Moose Conquering Fear. The first book in the trilogy is Nipper, and the last book in the trilogy is Know Your Mind. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. I hope that you will also listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or iHeartRadio and Stitcher. I'm Suzanne Harris, and I hope you'll join us for my next Books on Air podcast, because remember, you never know who's going to be here or what we're going to talk about. Thank you so very much for listening.